Welcome to the in-service today. We are Brain Friendly Reading, and we're here to share with you our school program called Spelling to Read. I'm Kristen Dwyer, and this is Elaine Smith. And we co-founded this literacy nonprofit with one goal in mind, which was to help every child learn how to read, one school, one community, one family at a time. So we have parent-teacher workshops. We are looking to partner with other nonprofits who want to support literacy by providing reading instruction through tutoring, to bring a program into those nonprofits to train those volunteers so that their time can be used most effectively. And of course, we have a school program, which is why we're here today. And we're very grateful to be at Holland Elementary today to share with you our Spelling to Read program. And this program was specifically designed to be layered on top of whatever literacy program, reading program was currently being used in the school. So that makes it very low cost in that way. It also has the pieces in it that allow children to be able to grow their reading skills so that they can move up the ladder of reading, all based on the latest science and the latest research around how children learn to read. Let's first take a look at this infographic called The Ladder of Reading. And if you look at it, you'll see that it was updated in 2019. So these are the latest statistics. That the top group of children learn how to read seemingly effortlessly. They're the 3- and 4-year-olds who get read to, and then just by, it seems like magic, they learn how to read. That's 5% of the kids. Another 35% of the children learn how to read with very little instruction, and it doesn't really matter what kind of instruction they get, they figure it out, and they learn to read at grade level proficiency. Then we have the orange and the red kids. So the orange kids are ones that need additional support. They need a structured program. They need people to work with them in a sequential way. They need a level of intensity with the instruction that the green children don't need. And the bottom 10 to 15% are the ones that we tend to think of as children with dyslexia. Could also be children with other learning difficulties. But those are the children that need the same thing as the ones in the orange, but they just need more of it. They need more repetition, more intensity, more one-on-one instruction, small group instruction, geared towards their specific needs. So I once taught, I want to tell you a little story. I once taught a child who was at the bottom, the very bottom, like no, you couldn't know less than she knew about reading. And she was 9 years old. And I went into this classroom and I had her as a student, and her name was Layla. And Layla was very talkative and inquisitive and seemed to have a lot of knowledge and information. Her verbal skills were outstanding, and she could share with you anything that you wanted to know about any subject. And it took me a while to figure out that Layla couldn't read because she had lots of coping skills to be able to distract and disguise this fact that she wasn't a reader. And children in the class were writing stories, and Layla wanted to write a story, and she was very hesitant. And I said, Layla, why don't you write it on the write-on wipe-off board, which was a coveted activity in the classroom. And she said, okay. And she went up to the write-on wipe-off board and was working independently, writing her story. And I was working with other children, and I went over to look at what she was doing, and I couldn't read a single word that she had written. There was nothing that was even phonetic in what she had written, because she didn't have any concept that letters attached to sounds in our spoken language. I thought, Houston, we have a problem. What am I going to do? I didn't have the literacy know-how to help Layla, and I knew that I didn't. And I turned to the district, I turned to the parents, I turned to the community, and there was very little help available for her. But fortunately for her, Elaine was coming for a visit. And Elaine came and she said, let me work with Layla. The parents agreed, the school agreed. Layla went and did one-on-one instruction with Elaine, about 15 to 20 hours. We collaborated on ways for her to extend that learning in the classroom. And she worked at least 4 days a week, at least an hour in the classroom on growing her literacy skills using some very independent tools. Within 6 months, the child was reading on grade level. And I share that with you as a vision of what's possible when children get appropriate intervention about what they're able to do, that level of intensity. Also, we knew that Layla was for sure dyslexic because her mom had taken her to a neuropsych eval and she was severely diagnosed as severely dyslexic. She also had ADHD, and she had 140 IQ, which plays a role in the fact that she got there in 6 months. But it doesn't mean that other children can't achieve that as well. So that's what we're here to talk about today, is how to support all those children moving up the ladder. And that experience with Layla got me thinking that there aren't enough Elaines in the world, and Kristens now, that I've taken my dyslexia certification and work with children and move them from non-readers to readers, sometimes while they're kicking and screaming under the table, but we move them from non-readers to readers, that there aren't enough of us. There aren't enough skilled tutors. And I began to see Elaine's vision, which has always been, what would it look like if we took the skills and the instructional methodologies that are used in the tutoring situation and we were able to apply them in classroom situations? Think about how many children we would be able to help with that kind of intervention in a whole group situation. Not that everybody would move from not reading to full fluency, but moving children up that ladder of reading. In fact, we know in states where they've done that they have doubled the number of kids in the green zone. They've taken proficient readers and turned them into advanced readers. And they've also cut in half the number of kids in the orange and the red zones. So pretty significant results that are verified by research done through universities. So all of that is pretty exciting. And the question then is, what are those instructional methodologies that people are using? What is the secret sauce? Where's the magic? And that magic, if you'll see here, comes in what we're calling a structured literacy approach. That structured literacy approach was an idea that was a name that was started to be used a number of years ago to describe a certain kind of instruction. We're going to talk about that. But you'll notice on this infographic that the structured literacy approach is essential for the kids who are in the orange and the red zone. They have to have it. Without it, they don't move. Numbers stay flat. But the kids in the green zone are also advantaged by it, that they grow their skills. They might be proficient readers and not such great spellers. And after they have a structured literacy approach delivered to them in their curriculum, they become fantastic spellers and they read at a higher level. Their comprehension goes up. Their vocabulary expands. So all of those pieces are true. So let's dive right into what a structured literacy approach looks like. So these are the elements of a structured literacy approach. And there's 6 of them. The first one is phonology. You can see he has really big ears. That just means that that's the part of language instruction that's oral. That's the piece that typically happens preschool, kindergarten, with rhyming and syllable clapping and alliteration, like the big brown bag, those kinds of things. They develop to help the children to develop this understanding that our spoken language has sounds and be able to identify what those sounds are. The next piece is the sound symbol connection. And the sound symbol connection is just knowing that this shape, that shape of A, says ah. That children have to know that the letters that they see on the page have sounds attached to them. And when they know that, then they begin to be able to use that information. The syllable instruction is around what are the beats within words. Because in a structured literacy approach, we help children to break down big words into their syllable parts so that when they're going to read them, they read them one syllable at a time, which helps it to be manageable for them. And they have tools in their toolbox for how to figure out how to do that. We give them those tools. The morphology is the understanding of, like, words have base words, they have suffixes, they have prefixes. Those change the meanings of the words, and that they can sometimes change the spellings of the words. The next piece is syntax. That means that every word has to be in a certain order in a sentence for it to make sense. And that exploration in Mrs. Vargas' class has been really interesting as of late. The understanding that words go in an order, and in that order, then you can make meaning out of the words, which is what we want for the semantics. That the children understand that written words have meaning, and they begin to create pictures in their mind of what it is that's on the written page. So the principles of structured literacy are pretty straightforward. That that instruction needs to be systematic and it needs to be cumulative. And what that means is that the children aren't taught in any varied order, that there's a certain way that science is telling us that all people on the planet learn to read. And it doesn't matter whether you're learning to read Chinese or Arabic or English, that this neurological process, what they're finding, is exactly the same. So when we teach children, we want to do it in a systematic way that's sequential, where we start at one place and we are moving forward in a certain way. And we also want it to be cumulative, that if you're teaching and you're like, I'm at lesson 10, I want to be able to only have in lesson 10 the things that happened in 1 through 9. I want to be able to just work with the information that they've been presented with thus far. So that's the cumulative piece of it. The next piece is really important, that the instruction be explicit. So remember back to the infographic that the kids were at the top level in the green, and we said those kids learned how to read by magic. They just intuited how to do it. They just figured it out on their own. That we don't want kids to have to figure it out on their own. That figuring it out on their own business is why a lot of children are in the orange zone. So when we teach in an explicit way, it just means that we're going to teach really intentionally. We're going to give them the exact information they need with no guessing. They don't have to infer anything. They don't have to try to figure it out by looking at something. That they have the information, it's in their toolbox, and they know what to do with it. And we're going to do it in a way that's called multisensory, or it could be called multimodal. People use different words. But what it means is that in our instruction with the children, we're going to use our eyes, our ears, our mouth, and our hands all at the same time. So you know this because in preschool and kindergarten classrooms, there would be lots of like Play-Doh and sandpaper and letters or salt trays or writing in foam on the shower wall. And while those things are good and helpful, they're not the piece that actually move things into long-term memory. They're one of the things that they're finding help children to want to repeat the activity, to do it lots of times, and that repetition is what helps move it into long-term memory. New piece of information for me that I learned this week, because this literacy know-how business is an ongoing process for everybody in the field because the science is directing us in a certain way. We're all learning as we're going. The last piece is that instruction is diagnostic. And the diagnostic piece, sometimes we think of that as really formal assessments, but those are really the informal assessments that you make on a daily basis. While the children are playing games, as a teacher, you're walking around the classroom and noticing that Johnny is really struggling with being able to still blend these words, and Sally is reading the words like bananas are yellow. Like, it's so easy for her. She needs a little bit of an extension activity. So that informal assessment that you do, that diagnostic piece, helps you to be able to know which kids are moving along and which kids still need additional repetition and support. Phonics is really just a method of teaching children how to read using a sound symbol connection. Knowing that cat is made up of 3 sounds, k, at, and when you blend those together, it says cat. But there's 2 pieces that have to come before phonics instruction in order for children to really be successful. And if they don't have those 2 pieces, you can teach phonics and the children struggle a lot. And those 2 pieces are the alphabetic principle, which is a fancy way of saying what we already talked about, that every shape in our alphabet has a sound attached to it. In fact, there are more than just the shapes in the alphabet. There are vowel teams and there are consonant, there's consonant blends and all different pieces that we're going to go through. So don't feel like that is going to be a stumbling block for you, because our program takes you right through what all those different pieces are and gives you a very systematic way of learning it and then delivering that instruction to your children. And the other piece that has to be in place is the phonemic awareness. And phonemic awareness comes from this Greek word phone, and phone just means sound. So whenever you hear a word like phonology or in your curriculum books it says phonemic awareness or phonics, all of those have that same Greek root word, which is sound. And when you read that, you can know that has to do with how kids hear the language. Phonemic awareness, very explicitly, is just the ability to hear and then manipulate the individual sounds that are in a word. That has to be in place, or children can't do phonics. They can't do phonics unless they have phonemic awareness, which is why it's been written into your curriculum. These are our sound charts. You've probably seen those in one of the classrooms if you've walked by. And the sound charts are a way for the children to be able to learn all the pieces of the alphabetic principle that they need to know in a way that's very structured and that provides for over-teaching and over-learning, so that you have a way for them to be able to practice that repetitively, so that your children who are in the orange and the red zone get the amount of repetition that they need to be able to move up that ladder of reading. It also helps them to create a schema in their mind where they can hang all this information. So when children have practiced these charts for a long time, and then you say to them, "What's this skr?" And you'll see them look up as if they're looking at their chart and go, "Skr, oh, it's at the bottom of this chart. And if I can't remember, I might remember scream. Oh, it's SCR, so skr." And now I know how to write skr, and I know how to pull that sound up for the reading. So there's been many, many conferences about the science of reading, and this is a little tricky to be able to see, but the key piece of this is that this summer, a leading researcher in the field of neurosciences, which is not education, was doing a presentation about the brain and all of these complex details about what dyslexic brains look like, what the brains of struggling readers look like, what the brains of fluent readers look like. And they're different in a way that's super complex that if you want to know about, you can look at the video on YouTube. But the key piece of it for us as educators is this screen. The most important part here is that piece where the sound and the letters are connected. That's the alphabetic principle we were talking about. That when the children are able to link the letters to the sounds, that it has the most profound impact on their reading and on their reading ability. So that's the fastest way to move kids up the ladder of comprehension and to be able to help them to be able to work independently decoding words on their own, to have tools in their toolbox so that they can begin to decipher words that were indecipherable for them before. And then through those connections and others, they begin to make meanings out of words, and that is part of that semantic piece where they understand that words are attached to real life objects, and they can create pictures in their mind as they're reading. So pretty exciting stuff. This other researcher, her name is Jan Hasbrock, and she has a wonderful, about hour-long YouTube video on the science of reading. And she's worked in a couple of different universities and done some pioneering research herself. And what she says that's really important is in the very first sentence, which is compelling evidence from a convergence of research. And that is important for us for this reason. A convergence of research means that many, many people have done studies in different ways. And all of those studies point in the same direction. They converge to say that 90 to 95% of all students can achieve literacy skills at or approaching grade level. And they got that information by looking at schools that were doing that. And the important component of that is to know that those are not schools that are in the wealthiest areas. Those are schools where there's high mobility, where there's socioeconomic challenges, where there's trauma-informed instruction happening in the schools. Those are schools that look like schools that we know of. And the piece that helped those schools to be successful was a systematic, explicit, multimodal instruction. What she talked about in her lecture was that is what structured literacy is. So that way of delivering curriculum to the children is what helped them to be able to have schools that achieved at that level. So here's a little bit more data for you before we move into our breakout sessions. That there's a group called Literate Nation, and they have done a lot of research to promote this idea that we've been talking about structured literacy. And they compiled some information. And what you see there is that these are the reading fluencies, the average scores for all students. And there's a national line for the national numbers, which is blue, and then one for Massachusetts, and one for Florida, and one for Wisconsin. Well, Massachusetts, and this begins in 1992 and goes until 2011. Massachusetts and Florida had state legislatures that passed laws that said that this type of instruction, this structured literacy, needed to be taught in all schools. And it took a while to get it going, for the funding to be there, for the teachers to be trained, which is a huge component of this, which is expensive to do all the teacher training. to get them ready, to get them geared up, which is why you see the green and the red don't rise right away. Legislature says one thing, it takes a while to see movement. But then after they got it going, the scores jumped significantly. And this is across the state. And when you look at the national scores, it looks fairly flat. And the bump you see up in the national scores when the data is spliced apart is simply because so many states have bumped up that it's pulling the national average up. So what's more significant is to look at the line for Wisconsin, which is the purple line. You see the purple line? Yeah. So Wisconsin has solidly, they chose Wisconsin as a test case because Wisconsin has solidly then and still today had their feet planted in a whole language approach to instruction. So their scores have stayed fairly flat. And what I told you earlier was that this is a fairly significant graph as well, that you see the red and the green going down, showing that the number of children who are reading below basic level has dropped in the 2 states who've implemented the structured literacy. The national average has gone down again, pulled down by those states that are doing it. But if you look at Wisconsin, it's actually more children are reading below. So this is important for us because I was driving in the car one day listening to the radio, and one of our senators said, state senators said, well, you know, here they were talking about reading and the House bill for 3rd grade reading law. And he said, well, you know, it's not that we've gotten any worse. It's just that other states have gotten better. And I thought, what does he mean? What does that mean? And it wasn't until I looked at the data that I began to understand what he meant. That Michigan has stayed just about the same as it's been before. But there's all this conversation about how reading has dropped in Michigan, how Michigan has fallen in its rankings across the board, right? But it's only fallen in its rankings because other states have gone up. Not because we're doing anything significantly different or worse or not as good, or teachers are failing now and they weren't failing before. All this other narrative gets laid onto it when the data is really clear that other states have gone up, which means that our ranking has gone down. So he was right in what he was saying. But the reality is that we can move in the same direction that other states. Other states have paved the way, shown us what works. The science is there behind the reading in the last 10 or 15 years with a convergence of the science saying this is the way to go. And interestingly for us, that it matches everything that we've learned in our dyslexia instruction, the decades of experience that Elaine has in public schools, utilizing programs that were very similar before structured literacy was even a name. She was pioneering that kind of education with struggling readers without even knowing that she was doing it. Well, maybe she did know. But so we're really glad to be here today with you to be able to share the structured literacy program. I'm not going to spend any more time talking about the science, but I do encourage you to YouTube Science of Reading, and you'll get to see a couple of videos that are very informative that give an overview again so that you can familiarize yourself with the structure, with the science of reading.